Good afternoon. Welcome to the June 29th, 2023 meeting of the Distressing the Full Board. Thank you for being here today. We do have a pretty full agenda today, and so we will do our best to jump right into it and move through. Before we get started, I do want to welcome our newest board member, Commissioner Dan Shackle, who was appointed last week, assumed the office Monday to lead the Department of Local Government Finance. So it's the replacement for Wes Bennett. Big shoes to fill, but I think he's up to the job. Due to DUAB, used to sit in a different chair before. It's just moved chairs, different intern. So
Thank you.
glad to have you. Yes. With that, we will, as is our custom, we will start with public comment after we go through the minutes for the last meeting. Chance to sign up, or you wish to speak, please either send a message to Pete and Jessica, or let us know that you want to sign up. I think we have another person to sign up there, so we'll make sure that we get your name on the list. We do have in front of us two sets of minutes from our June 1st public meeting and our June 1st executive session meeting, circulated in advance of the meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or comments on those minutes? Okay. Hearing none, would entertain a motion to approve?
I move.
Second?
Second.
Motion in the second.
One more note.
What's that?
One more note.
Yes. And so we will have to call the vote. Would you call the roll?
Chairman Gavin,
Yes.
Mr. Joyce,
Yes.
Ms. Kabaki,
Yes.
and Mr. Shackle for this vote only, and Ms. Brown.
Yes.
Minutes are adopted. We will pivot to public comment now, just as a reminder, since we have a number of people signed up today, we do ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. I'm going to call your name if you'll come to the podium to speak. Mr. Miller will begin a timer on the screen that we'll use to sort of guide us on that 3-minute clock so that you don't have to try to keep track of that. So with that, let's start. We have Dr. Michaela Spangenberg up first. Dr. Spangenberg. Hi.
You have one more sign up sheet.
I'll make sure I get it.
Okay.
We're gonna pass it
Over
down.
here. Okay.
Thank you.
Conflicting instructions. Good afternoon, everybody. I am hopeful, cautiously optimistic that maybe with some of the changes that we've seen, we can maybe start a new chapter for our school, because our kids definitely are in sore need of it. I don't know if everybody who's new to the situation has familiarized themselves with the academics, the test scores, the graduation rate, all of which started to plummet before COVID. But these are things that sorely need to be addressed for our kids. The lack of adequate facilities need to be addressed still. You know, we don't have a single swimming pool now, and we have a city situated on a lake, and every year we watch young people die because they have no place to learn how to swim, which is ridiculous because that feels like something out of the 1970s or 60s. You know, that shouldn't be the current state of education in Indiana. But further, you know, we saw recently, you know, there were some concerns about some cheating that had happened in order to elevate some of the graduation rate by just a couple of points. The fact that adults facilitated that in our schools because of pressure from the administration to try to put a nice face on something that isn't nice, which is the academic situation. But further, there's been a number of concerns for a very long time about the financial situation, about financial transparency. We desperately need financial transparency. The kind of situation we have now, when you compare it to other school corporations in Indiana or in Florida, where many people from MGT reside, if you look at where their kids go to school and what the standard of financial transparency and accountability is there, it's not what we have. And even as a semi-lay person, you know, back in 2020, I actually did a statistical analysis looking at the costs and the proportional costs in our school corporation in terms of expenditures compared to everything else in the county. I use the county as a sample because, you know, that's more comparable than if you look at the state. And interestingly enough, I believe one of the first sessions, we had public comment, I brought that up. And I sent it in and I never heard anything back. And I've sent it in again. And indeed, of course, my data is fine and my analysis is fine. But it also shows that we've had this mysterious kind of inflation of district-wide expenditures that started after the takeover began. And as a community, we have no way of knowing what's happening with that money. And that's why many people were against the referendum. And we've seen that, it doesn't seem like the referendum money was spent in the ways that people believed it would be. And further, I've heard from people who recently left the administration that 1.3 million is not really there. And so that makes me very concerned about how are we going to get out of distress status and when will this actually end? And when it ends, are we going to be in a position to be a normal independent school corporation, or will we have no schools and be set up for failure? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spangenberg. Up next, we have Dr. Augusta Hall. Yeah, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, 3 minutes. My name is Dr. Augusta Ware-Denille, retired educator, grant writer, and now community STEM activist for over 30 years. The blessing for me is all my work centered on the education of children in my own hometown of Gary, Indiana. As you know, we have a major academic problem in our community, unlike anything we have ever seen before. But we have faith that we can restore our school system to where it once was, and admired by so many nationally and internationally. So we must directly attack and treat our academic problem. We recommend a remedial structural intervention infused within the school curriculum. We suggest before the fall, looking at the 21-22 assessment scores, looking at students' strengths and weaknesses, placing them in grade level appropriate clusters of learning, monitor and tweak this technique until it works. That's it. Again, we recommend assessment of students' strengths and weaknesses, learn what help they need before any instruction is given, provide individualized tutoring based on their last test scores, place the students in age-appropriate remediation initiatives during the entire school year, starting in the fall. With this support cushion foundation, watch our children thrive. I promise you. It worked for our Gary Trio programs like Student Support Services, Educational Talent Search, where over 90% of Gary children complete high school and over 75% attend college. Just a sample of successful Gary students. We cannot afford to lose another generation of children to the social environments by continuing with the same old educational tradition. It is not working. When Gary children, third grade children cannot read the foundation for learning. And let me add, data shows that Gary students are not attending or graduating from college. I don't have to tell you that, you all are researchers and scholars. So make sure our children learn a STEM trade before they walk across the high school graduation stage. We want our children to be competitive. If they can master video games, surely they can master algorithms that build these games. So we have to save our children. As a community, we have to step in, and we will continue to step in this battle until something changes. Please go back and look at the data reports for college attendance and college graduation. Finally, DUAB, please use the dollars appropriately. Use them for remediation. Use them for special education and mental health services by way of building an alternative school. We need it. Provide student development, professional training for teachers who have no clue how students of color develop. I pray today that you hear our petitions. I thank you for your consideration and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Denise. Up next, we have Ms. Natalie Ammons. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I come here today, my name is Natalie Ammons, mother, grandmother, concerned citizen, and an advocate for my community, Gary, Indiana. I'm extremely upset and disappointed by the way Gary's history has been written in terms of this takeover. Years of growth, studies, sacrifices, and commitments made by a legacy and an ancestry of dedicated individuals has been marred by a takeover that was designed and proposed as a means of coming to assist during turbulent times. You know, turbulent times, we all have, Gary wasn't the only one that was involved with problems, but yet still we're the ones that is the only school system that still remains hostage in the takeover. Academically, our children are failing via shrinking reading skills, a graduation rate, attendance issues, abandoned school structures, money being siphoned for other people's benefits. You know, I've attended numerous meetings that were smoke screened to give the illusion that things were getting better, and they have not gotten better. They have gotten worse. Our children who stood up for themselves were ridiculed and put down by the same persons who were put in charge of assisting them, quote unquote. The same persons who were put in charge accused them of being incapable of thinking for themselves. And our children are descendants of slaves. They're descendants of leaders and warriors who fought over and over to overcome degradation and being treated as less than. We have been led to believe that these same people that came in to help us was concerned about the baseline data indicators and what determinations were determinant factors for success or failure. You know, the academics, our math, our science, all of these things have tanked down. And yet still we came before DUAB and asked them not to continue the process. And we can't even get simple answers. Our students are advancing through how they advancing through pathways. We are told that they'll get back to us with information. FOIA requests have been put in, no response. What's the update on exposures of technical and vocational opportunities? How have the dollars been spent? How has the debt been handled? And it's wisdom, DUAB still decided to continue leading Gary Community School Corporation further down the path of deterioration and destruction. It is painful. And it's not a pain that I can tell you or I can describe completely to you within 3 minutes. I dare not even try. Yet the most painful part is that because we're still enslaved within this takeover, many of our children will endure this pain for years to come, some for a lifetime. But the decision makers who disguise themselves as being helpful, knew nothing about our community, our children, our culture, but they came in saying that they were going to help, when in actuality, they did more harm than good. Our voices are demanding that you do the right by us. Academics, finances, and a deep audit as to where the money goes, and stop hiding everything undercover. Here, be upfront. Here, you came in to take over, you gotta do better.
Thank you, Ms. Ammons. Up next, we have Mr. Robert Bugg. Good afternoon, Mr. Bugg.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be with you. I may take a little bit more than 3 minutes. Gave you all a packet of you to follow along with. My name is Robert Bugg. I'm former president of the Gary elected board that was eliminated recently. Come before you today because there's a questionable $125,644,122 that was received by Dr. Paige McNulty, and we don't know what happened to it. So I'm going to read this in case other people have it. I, Robert Bugg, this request an itemized amortization of the funds received by the Gary Community School Corporation and dispensed by Dr. Paige McNulty. This is to include specifically the grants. And I gave you all each one of this is for $1.2 million. This one for $787,500. To make sure that this money was spent as it was intended to spend. Now, this money didn't come from 1065, it didn't come from the referendum. This is just money I have proof that was received by her. I've heard of official request that a forensic party to determine if all the grant money will utilize specifically per grant request and all funds received by the Gary Community School Corporation. This will ensure the taxpayers and citizens will give a reputable account of their taxes. The other thing I want to tell you all is that they passed the state law 1315, House Bill 1315, required that we perform a service for no money. I'm not sure if the take this out and read it. I will read, this is what came out of 357. Members of the existing advisory fiscal management board do not receive salary or per diem for being members. However, existing statute provides that the Gary community new governing body will have the power to pay each member of the governing body a salary of $2,000 a year as well as per diem. Now, we have been required to perform a service by state law. And then in that same law said that we will not be paid. That is like an indentured servant, that is slavery. Now, we're similarly situated because the new board is going to be advisable to do it. But they will be paid, but we were not since 2018. We had to attend meetings at our own expense. Now, this is the document that y'all have showing them what they received is $787,000. I brought these so that you can see for yourself that I wasn't just talking off my head. Now, when I brought this up in the meeting, I asked Dr. McNulty about this money, and she said that the money went to the YWCA. It didn't come to the school corporation. However, in this document, you see that the director of the YWCA said, we are glad to partner with the Gary Community School Corporation. That means that the money, and we still don't know what happened to the money. By the way, this $125 million I'm talking about was earmarked for approximately 100 students. 100 students for after hour services. We don't know what they did with it, what kind of programs, anything. The other thing, this document I have here for you is showing that the total ESSER fund, ESSER 3 fund was $1,102,472,818. That total the amount to, and I gave you 125 million. The other thing is, I'm a disabled veteran. I came to my country, I came back to serve my community. This is the document that I received where Dr. McNulty illegally removed me off of the library board. And she signed my name as if I agreed to it. Now that Dr. Rachel told me this morning that they take care of it. I haven't met him personally yet, but this is agreed to. This is our signature. My name is on the bottom of that, saying that upon, if I read it to you, she signed it on behalf of the former Gary Community, on behalf of me, that I agreed for her to remove me from the library. These things have been going on and on. By the way, I had requested by.
If you could please conclude your remarks.
Okay, let me wrap it up. To get this information from Dr. McDonald, he brought it to Chairman McAdams, and after 20 Freedom of Information Act, none of them was responded to. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Tracy Coleman. Coleman?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy Coleman, and I'm here to advocate for the beautiful American children who live in Gary, Indiana. I always want to make sure that people see our children as your children, because as Americans, as Indiana citizens, we want all of our children to do well. And there's no doubt that there's an academic crisis that we're facing in Gary, Indiana. Anytime you have only 0.6% of your children able to pass reading, anytime you go to beverage and you see a score of 0% for the children who are able to pass ELA and math, you know that we're dealing with an academic crisis. But there's a saying, if you're in a hole, the first thing you stop digging. And to me, with MGT and the system, every time somebody comes in with a different experiment with what to do for Gary's children, we keep digging our children further and further into this academic crisis. And as a parent, when my son is, and I believe Attorney McAdams, you attend Bloomington also, when he goes there, I just recognize how harmful that academic crisis is that our children face. So not only are you going to college, but you gotta go to college with a, you're at a deficit. You didn't have a science book. You didn't have an iPad. And so the stress on our children to succeed and compete is tremendous. And that's where you get to a point where you recognize MGT doesn't make data-driven decisions. So when they say extend the day, change the high school start time to 7 o'clock, those decisions aren't data-driven, they're emotionally driven. And in the end, our children pay a price for that because the data will show things have crashed. So we will submit to DUAB that as we transition to this new board, this new superintendent, they need as many resources, if not more, that MGT has. Because if they had hundreds of millions of dollars and all these resources and the scores crashed, our new board and our new superintendent needs a chance to succeed. And I would just say, we need an alternative school. We need high ability. One of the problems I saw is the perception of people in charge. Every child needs basic skills. No, some children are high ability. Some children may excel in science, but they don't excel in math. But because we have people outside of the community coming in and experimenting, they never get to the right answer because they just don't understand. And no matter how much you talk to them and explain it, it doesn't click on. Then I would just also say facilities, please do well. You have the power to appropriate the money to tear down all these buildings. Ambridge, Duncan, Milton, Norton, Riley, because our children have to walk past these abandoned buildings. There are children who are home. We find, unfortunately, the community has to deal with people being killed in these buildings. They're unsafe. So you have the power that you can appropriate the money. And we mentioned the swimming pool, we need library. Gary Middle School, .6, no library, unacceptable. So now our new board and our new superintendent needs the resources to just do simple things with libraries and bathrooms. And finally, I would just go to this sheet right here. When I did a freedom of information request, this is what we deal with as a community. Just everything's redacted. It just be drama for no reason. We're Americans, we're Indiana citizens. If I ask a question, hey, it shouldn't be that difficult. But there's this us against them, when in the end, these are our children. No one wins if you try to make it difficult. And I do want to thank Pete Miller for just saying, give her the information. It took me like over 9 months to get a sheet that wasn't redacted, which is just ridiculous. And so in the end, we're in this together. Help us help our children. You please reach out to them because we need somebody objective. There's too much implicit bias, too much inability to accept what they're looking at with the data. And finally, I did send an email about community schools. I would encourage DUAB to apply for that because our children in Gary need a lot. They need a lot of resources. They have a community that loves them. But as we transition, we need to be able to transition us back together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Up next, we have Ms. Nikki Bird. Good afternoon, Ms. Bird.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Great, thanks for being here.
Good to see you. First of all, I just want to let you see this. This is a copy of the certificate that I have. It's the Indiana Congress of Parents and Teachers Incorporated in 1912, Certificate of Life Membership. I hold this from the PTA. I served as PTA president at Jefferson Elementary School for 5 years. And I also served as the vice president of the Gary Council of PTAs for 3 years. I have more than 14,000 volunteer hours in the Gary school system, middle school through high school, basically. as a retired corrections officer, worked in Crown Point 23 years. And during that time, and up until 2 years ago, with the pandemic and the administrators that we had, I wasn't allowed in the schools, so I don't want to go into all of that. I just want to say that we need some help. Our children need help. We need our parents to be able to get into the schools, responsible parents in the schools to help. That has not been the case. We spent, well, we didn't, but somebody spent $8 million on furniture for schools, for 9 schools, but our children don't have decent computers. That makes no sense to me. We have to get to a point where our children become important and we try to do what we need to do for them so that they can compete with the rest of the world. We are far, far behind. We got second and third graders who cannot read, they cannot do anything, and it's not their fault. We need parents inside these buildings. We need to get our PTAs back up to par. We need to have people inside of the buildings that are not teachers, but are there to help the teachers as well as to help the students. That's what I was doing, and some other people were doing it, but we're not welcome there now. So I'm hoping that with this new group that's coming in, that they're gonna be able to work with us, that we will be able to work with them, and that we will be able to get some things done. Because it is, I just have to say this. If you were in my place, I don't think you would be happy. I don't. Everybody in this room that I'm looking at, what can you really do for our children? What can I really do for yours? It's a different language. A fight for you might be, I learned early on this, I was working with this little girl, and she said, oh, we got in a fight. My husband and I had a horrible weekend. And I found out that she made just a verbal argument. Well, for me, a fight means to make a black eye. So, you know, a difference in the language. You don't feel what we feel. You're not going through what we're going through. Our children need us in the building. They need to see somebody that they can relate to. And that's not happening. It's not happening. If I were coming to your community and try to give your children what I know from my culture, they wouldn't understand it. It's a matter of how we relate to each other. And not that you're not doing a good job, you're doing a good job on your end, but it's just not working for us. We have to get in to be with our children. We have to be allowed to come into the buildings and be welcome. Oh, parents can come in, they can do this, they can do that. We get in and then they look at us and go, my name is on the list of, we don't want her in the building. No, she can't go in the building. So I haven't been in this past couple school years. And I don't think anybody can do it any better than me because I worked inside the jail for 23 years. So I can tell them about the consequences of negative behavior, which is what I do. And I haven't been able to do that. Nobody in this room can talk about being locked up unless you've been in jail. And I don't think anybody has. So we need to be able to talk to our children, get in and help them as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin. Up next, we have Mr. Robert Coleman. Good afternoon, Mr. Coleman.
Hello. My name is Robert Coleman, community servant. I want to say hello to everyone because no one said hello to the community when you walked in. That's disrespectful. Okay. Also, I hope Pete don't turn off the volume and mess, no, it's not funny, or mess with the image like he always do every time I come in front of this committee. Okay, I sent Pete, resent some more things that I've already sent to you all. Now, I hope he passed it out, my concerns, but I'm gonna make this short. I want you all to forgive Gary, Indiana School debt like you did the Southern School District. I want a forensic audit on MGT and whoever been controlling the Gary Community School Corporation before this gentleman take over in 2 days or whatever. So we can know where he started. So all the stuff that was screwed up before he started, I want that done. Okay, also, if, it's these consultants, if they already had a part to do with MGT and started a new corporation, we don't want them as a community. We don't want them, because if you walked out on the, children and started your own business, we don't want them. Okay, McNulty and her crew walking around like, acting like they the savior of our community. They did not. They made it worse. MGT made it worse. Our education, they put profit over our children's education. The education went down. It's sad. From A's to F. So that's what I'm just trying to say. We need a new start. Give this gentleman a new start. Forgive the debt. So we can start directly at zero and we know what his progression is. I think that's fair. You did it for the southern schools. Do it for us. Please do it for us. Everything have went downhill. Take us out, take us from being the takeover. We the only district in Indiana that has a takeover, not needed. We need local control. We might have a few people that the mayor picked one, the council people pick one, and Jenna pick three. We want to pick all of them for our community. We deserve it. Other communities have it. We want them to let the PTSA, I used to be the PTSA president. We want the PTSA back in the schools. We want it. Simple thing. We want a pool. I've been talking about a pool forever. Why spend $8 million on furniture and not knock down these abandoned school buildings? They could have used the $100 million for something better. That's why I want this forensic audit. We want to know where this money went to. They claim that they paid only 2 companies for their furniture. But then they take our furniture that wasn't good for our children, as they claim, and send it to Ethiopia. That's not right. If it wasn't good for our children, why you send it to Ethiopia? See, it's just some common sense. You see these people get up with all these doctor titles and all that. Use common sense, please. And I'm gonna sit down, but I sent Pete some more. I've been sending you all tons of requests and things. No response, but hopefully he passed it out to you all. And you all have a blessed day. Thank you. Jesus is gonna fix this.
Thank you, Mr. Colvin. Up next, we have Mrs. Lavetta Tyndall. Good afternoon, Mrs. Tyndall.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tyndall, long-term citizen of Gary, Indiana, a voting citizen of Indiana, and a tax-paying citizen of Indiana. DUAB, I'm asking you to use your power to ensure that I and my fellow Garyites are free to take an active part in the structuring and running of an equitable, high-quality educational system for all Gary students. See to it that all students are properly tested for and receive warranted IEPs, and that teachers of record are in place and doing their jobs. Ensure Ensure that non-English speaking students have professional interpreters to assist in the classroom, not fellow classmates, but professional interpreters to ensure that the non-English speaking student receives fair attention. Ensure that hearing impaired and otherwise challenged students receive one-on-one
full-time professional assistants, that is wheelchairs, diapers, bibs, whatever's needed. How many Westside Leadership Academy 2023 graduates were there? Do you have a number? How many and what amount of money was awarded in scholarships? To whom? Who tracks them? Who tracks the progress of the students once they're in college? How many certificates of attendance were there? Manager Razor, welcome. What will you do to ensure that proper, respectful treatment of our students at Westside Leadership Academy and other schools will be offered to our students? What will you do to ensure that wholesome nutritional choices of meals are offered to our students? What will you do to ensure that teaching standards are up to par per Indiana regulations? What will you do to ensure that all of the Gary Community School Corporation administration and staff have training in diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion? And what are the plans? This is a question to both Manager Razor and the DUAB board. What are the plans to formally introduce our new administration of our schools under Manager Razor and his assistant? And where are the, I don't see pictures of other members of the board. Should we expect them today? Financial officer, other people on the board that are usually here, academics officer, where are they?
They're doing this for.
Okay, I missed that. Can't see back there. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tindall.
I hope to get responses to these questions.
I think many of them will be addressed today.
I hope so.
Up next, we have Ms. Christy Sass.
Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Came a long way for 3 minutes, so I have to be efficient. So if it's once, it's okay to take fish from a chest. This is podcast. Watch this movie. And where's the camera? Can they see it?
Oh, I guess
Right here. The camera is here.
Hold
Okay.
on. Here, let's point that thing right there. Right.
Okay, so let's and right to read. Okay, so my name is Christy Sass. I've had a house in Gary for 5 years. I'm a refugee from Indiana, from Illinois. And happy to be here. Indiana has been better in every way. So I'm just here about teaching the kids to read. I don't care, I don't have any other agenda. I've always wanted kids to read, and I'm a little nervous because I don't think I've given a presentation since I retired 5 years ago. So, I am here today because I'm really excited because I think I just found a piece of the puzzle on why the kids can't read. So I'll get to that in a minute, but I'm actually happy right now. Okay, so I've been volunteering at Marquette Park to help the kids to read. I was given some third, fourth, and fifth graders who are at the bottom of the barrel struggling to read. And I am watching a couple other reading intervention teachers. And I saw after like a week that the thing they were using wasn't going to work because it had things like, in the bottom level reader was the word climb. Like climb ends with a silent B, and the I looks like it should be a 4I, and it's a long I. So what the heck is this word doing in the lowest level? So along around this time, I've been following educators on Instagram and this and that, so I sent an email that told me about this. And then this led me down this rabbit hole of learning. I've been doing a lot of reading, like why our kids can't read and what we can do about it. Language at the speed of sight and all kinds of things like that. So I stumbled on this one technique where you do, you can use different things, but we use some magnetic letters on whiteboards. And you start with like sit and say, okay, that's sit. How could you make it mit? You know, and they combine learning, listening to the sounds and the letters, the sounds that the letters make, and it comes more from the sounds. So I found some better ways to do things. this is one of them. I went to talk to the principal and said, hey, this thing they're using isn't really gonna work. She's like, I'm okay with you trying something else. So I did, and I want to show my thank you note from one of my kids. I will treasure this for the rest of my days. And then this one felt bad because she hadn't written me thank you, so I So then, okay. So then there were some fourth graders though that still weren't getting it. I was appalled that I had at least 2 out of the 7 kids I had did not recognize the word the. How can you not recognize the word the? It's like one of the top 5 most frequent words. So I was like, oh my God, and I could never, there was this one kid that I feel bad about because he was always wanting to like sharpen the pencils in or go to the bathroom, and I'm not a teacher by trade, so I didn't recognize that he was just avoiding to show that he didn't know how to read. So anyway, I came back around to something I had heard about, and there's a Black PhD named Julie Washington, who's done some work, and, oops, okay, she read this, Are You My Mother, to a little kid, and then said, what you read, what you tell me about it, and she said, you know, ain't no way you my mama, ain't no way that you're my mom. So she thought it was cute at first, but then she realized that, oh, it's because this child is reading this, speaking a different way at home, and then she's having to read, and you have to go through a couple conversions. So it's as if the parents are speaking Italian at home, which would have been the case in my parents. So, I'm not Black, so I apologize if I didn't hear anything. Okay, so there's this African-American English, which is spoken, and I found out it's Tuesday that it's a real thing, and it's got words, grammar rules and stuff. So it's not just lazy English or something, it's the real thing. So the problem is, the reason those kids can't understand the is they don't use the TH. So there's with instead of with, and there's duh instead of the. So they're going to the store, they're not going to the bus store. So the thing I'm excited about, I'm teaching a couple of them over the summer, and I think there's got to be a way that we can do in kindergarten or preschool. There's got to be this extra step that acquaints the kids who are speaking American English at home, because they're not all, of course, but the ones who are need a little background, just like you would do with a Spanish learner. And I'm trying to get in touch with Dr. Washington. There seems to only be one school in LA that's a bilingual school that's doing anything with this, but I think this is the answer, or at least part of the answer, because this program, they start from sounds. There's 20, you ever think about this? There's 26 letters in the alphabet, there's 44 sounds in English. That's why CH makes a ch and SH makes a sh, because there's more sounds than letters. So you can you can bring a kid up a grade level in 12 hours with one of these programs. And I'm gonna prove it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'd love to talk to the curriculum people.
Did you make that? Follow.
Pardon me?
Did you say, I'm sorry, I'm not Black?
Did you?
Yeah.
What else did you say? I'm sorry, I'm not Black. Then what did you follow?
I'm not comfortable while she's recording me.
What did you just say?
They're recording there.
You don't see it being recorded. It's quite things right on the table.
Why you ask? I feel like I'm being put on the spot.
Perhaps,
Actually, when you're ready to go.
if I could ask, we do have a public meeting. Perhaps we could discuss it afterwards.
Turn off your equipment and discuss it now. Thanks.
I'm happy to discuss it.
If I could ask the audience, so that we can proceed. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone who signed up for public comment. We do appreciate everyone taking the time to share with us today. We do have, next, we're going to pivot to conversation about some updates about Gary Community Schools. Before we get started, I do want to introduce in person our 2 new leaders for Gary Community Schools, Dr. Mike Razor and Ms. Mavis Nelson, here joining us today in person. They both joined us by camera last time. We asked them to save the trip, but this time they were able to join us in person. And we are going to cover a number of different topics that were discussed during public comment. Our first, we're gonna pivot first to an academic update with Ms. Nelson.
Council?
Great, so excited to share a couple of updates today. We'll start by introducing our new team of academics. We'll do a little bit of a wrap up on the school year, the same kind of data that you all have been seeing throughout the year. We will dig in a little bit on graduation rate. Unfortunately, we do not have the 2023 numbers yet. We will share those as soon as we're able.
Too bad. I don't know what to say. Yeah, I agree.
Right now, just going over the things that we're going to share. So we'll talk about graduation rate, and we'll get in a little bit to our goals and priorities for the upcoming school year. So I'll start by letting our team introduce themselves who are joining virtually. We are very excited to promote two women who were already serving in the district. They're both natives from Gary, very talented, smart ladies, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Ms. Hobson, do you want to go first? This is our new Chief Academic Officer.
Sure thing. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kershel Hobson. I am a Gary native and a graduate of Westside Leadership Academy. And I am so elated to serve as the Chief Academic Officer at Gary Community School Corporation. This is my 19th year in education. I've served in every role from a playground supervisor to last year in being the Director of Secondary Curriculum at Gary Schools. So I'm excited to continue to partner with all of you, as well as the community, students, staff, and stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Goods, our Chief of Schools.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm kind of on two devices. I am in Dallas, virtual. We attended a teachers conference, teacher and administrators conference. So I am in the midst of travel, but I do want to say greetings to everyone. I am Dr. Esther Goods. I graduated from Westside High School some years ago, and I started teaching in Gary. My teaching career was about 14 years. And then I was the inaugural principal of New Tech in Gary. I went on to become executive director of secondary education for School City of Hammond. And I served for a short stint as assistant superintendent in East Chicago before returning home as an elementary director. I received my doctorate in educational leadership from Indiana State, focused on mathematics. And my mantra is I was a successful student coming out of the Gary schools, and I want that same thing for our students today and tomorrow. So I am happy to join the team. I'm excited, and I know we have a lot of work to do, so we are ready to go.
Thank you. We're very excited to work with Ms. Hobson and Dr. Goods this year to make some of these academic goals a reality. We have in this packet, first our academic goals, which have been shared with you previously. We do not yet have the data to report out on this. We hope to have it by our next meeting at the end of July. We have to just wait for that data to be made public before we can analyze it and share it back with you all. Just want to emphasize that, of course, at the end of the day, what we're focused on is student learning outcomes. We're going to talk about implementation data in a moment. But know that our eye is always on, are we hitting these student learning goals, and we'll report on that as soon as we're able. You can see on the next slide just how we think about this work, which is setting long-term targets that are ambitious, breaking those down into annual targets, and then ultimately breaking them down at least to the quarterly level, which is what we've been reporting out on. I'll invite Dr. Goods to speak about the progress we made in Q4. You've seen this same data at the end of Q1, Q2, and Q3. So wanted to report back on how the year wrapped up. Dr. Goods?
Absolutely. So in looking at the data that has been collected over the past school year, 22-23, we've looked at collaborative structures, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about walkthroughs throughout the classrooms and during the school day. Principals have been walking through, they've been collecting data, they've been giving feedback to teachers. Those Q4, the status of those walkthroughs, that it looks as if it says NA. However, those walkthroughs were rolled into evaluations. And we know that educators have had to do more evaluations in semester 2 than in semester 1 to accommodate for some of the additional feedback that was needed for teachers. So therefore, that was absorbed into evaluations and the feedback that teachers were given. So those weekly walkthroughs rolled into evals, and on average, the schools completed those at a rate of 95%. Then when we look at professional learning communities, PLCs, 100% of that goal was met. Principals and teachers were very intentional about hosting PLCs, looking at student data, working on continuous improvement. Data systems and structures. So there is a red mark, and that comes under school attendance and discipline. And so when we look at school attendance and then we go look at positive behavior and intervention supports, we know as educators that those tend to decrease towards the end of the school year. And of course, hours dropped, and we know we still have work to do and supports to embed. Principals were given feedback and also created feedback for each other on why our data looks the way it does. So we know going forward that we're going to address it and continue to work on improvements. 50% of the schools did meet their goals, so that was a win, but we do have 50% of the work to do in that department.
Thank you, Dr. Goods. I'll then invite, in lieu of data from 2023, which again, we don't have yet, but we'll have soon, we did want to take some time today and just dig a little deeper into graduation rates. I know there have been some questions about our graduation rate. We've compiled some information and some data to share, to hopefully help answer some of those questions. Ms. Hobson, can you speak to the graduation rate?
Sure thing. So let's talk a little bit about graduation rates and how they are calculated. So the graduation rate equals the number of students who earn a diploma in 4 years or less, that's your numerator, divided by the number of students that are in that year's cohort. So for example, cohorts are formed at the beginning of your 9th grade year. A cohort is a students who enter 9th grade in the same high school in the same year, and then of course, all the students that enroll after that. So essentially, each graduation year is a cohort. So as we commonly would say, the class of 2022 or the class of 2023 is equivalent to a cohort. Let's look a little bit at our state graduation rate. Indiana gives 2 graduation rates. Of course, one is state, the other is federal. Let's start with state. So students stay on a cohort unless they exit for a valid reason. And the valid reason for the state graduation rates are listed here on the slide. So students who have transferred to another school or an educational program that awards a diploma, they could be removed from a cohort. Students who have left the country or are deceased, students who are transferred to homeschool or a virtual school, students who have left school because of long-term medical conditions, students that are incarcerated, students that are placed by DCFS, and then of course, students that are missing or can't be located. Those students can be removed from a cohort with valid documentation. That documentation is so important because at the end of each cohort year, the state does an audit to every school district in Indiana, and our schools are required to give the Indiana Department of Education that documentation. Okay, so that's how a state graduation rate is calculated. Now, federal graduation rate is just a little bit different. It's calculated.
We lost volume. Hold on a second.
Michelle, we can't hear you at the moment.
I can jump, I should not.
Country or is deceased. So those are the only, can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you now. We lost, as soon as you pivoted to talk about the federal graduation rate, we lost.
Okay, let me back up a little bit. So are there any questions about the state rate thus far and how the state rate is calculated?
Kershel, just, if I could, one point that I think I understand, but I want to make sure that everyone else has an understanding of that.
Mhm.
It's not just Gary School's assessment of whether these students have left the cohorts in these factors. My understanding is that's a process that you go through with the Department of Education and other schools in the state, because that's who you can share information with, to determine whether a student is or is not properly counted in your cohort or somebody else's cohort.
Exactly. So we have several systems that all work and talk and interchange with one another to ensure that that student is on the proper cohort. So for instance, if a student attended Crown Point High School at the beginning of their 2019-2020 school year, they would be on the Crown Point High School graduating class of 2023 cohort. But then the student left and came to Gary Community School Corporation. They would now be transferred from that Crown Point cohort to the Gary Community School Corporation cohort of 2023. So that documentation is essential to ensure that, hey, this kid really belongs to our district.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Melton.
All right, thank you. Quick question to the students that's missing. You mentioned students that's incarcerated. How is that currently being tracked? And once they are identified, what's the mechanism to provide, some educational services to them, especially if they're in our county?
Mm-hmm. So we have a working relationship with the law enforcement department. Generally, they will let us know if a student is incarcerated. If the student is incarcerated over 20 days, it has to be at least 20 days, then we have to get those records from Lake County and keep those records here at our school corporation and turn that into the state, and then that student will be able to be removed from the cohort. So that's currently how we track it.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any additional questions on state graduation rate? I want to make sure that everybody understands the division problem. That is the number of students that earn a diploma in 4 years or less divided by the number of students that are on that cohort. And that's your state graduation rate. Is everyone okay with me moving on to federal?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so federal graduation rate is the exact same. It's the same division problem. The only difference is federal does not allow the same number of exclusions that the state allows. So when we go to the next slide, you'll see that your denominator becomes a bit larger because it doesn't allow for some students to be exited or excluded from the cohort. Wait, go back one more. I want to explain just a couple more things.
Sorry.
That's okay. So there's also a 5-year graduation rate, and it uses the exact same methods of calculation. The only difference is that students that graduate 1 year after are allowed to graduate and become a part of the 5th year cohort. So for instance, if there was a student in the graduating class of 2022 that didn't quite finish on the graduation date, they have until September 30th of 2023 to finish their credentials. Once that student finishes, they will become a part of the 5th year cohort graduation rate. Any questions? Okay. And then there's also a non-waiver graduation rate. This excludes students who qualify for a waiver from completing post-secondary readiness competencies. An example of this would be if a student were to transfer into Westside Leadership Academy and they were in the process of completing their bucket 3, is what we refer to it as here on site. And they were in the process of completing their bucket 3, and it's something that maybe they were taking there that we don't offer here. That would be an opportunity for us to grant a waiver to that student. However, I'm happy to say that in 2022, we granted 0 waivers to students. So all of our students completed buckets 1, 2, and 3 of the graduation pathways. And then I'd like to read the note at the bottom too, because it's important. Please note that for a student to be removed from the cohort, the district must have documentation that they have transferred to another program. This is often difficult to attain, particularly when students move out of state. During their annual audit, IDOE typically adds some students back into the cohort for whom appropriate documentation cannot be attained. So for us, being so close to Chicago in Illinois, a different state, oftentimes we don't receive that documentation. So that is a challenge for us. Let's go to the next slide, please. I'll pause for questions briefly. Okay, cool. That means everybody's right with me. So let's take a peek at this in practice. So this example is from our 2022 graduation year cohort, and I'm going to go through each column. So the first column was our state graduation rate, because remember there's two rates, state rate and federal rate. So this column is our state rate from 2022 pre-audit. So this is before we turned all that documentation over to the Indiana Department of Education. We had 203 graduates. There were 251 students in our cohort, 251 on the denominator, 203 on the numerator. So our pre-audit graduation rate was 80.88%. Once the state, I'm moving to the next column. Once the state reviewed our documentation, we still had 203 students that received diplomas. Our cohort increased a bit from 251 to 256. The reason that happens is because those systems that I mentioned that interchange and talk with one another, they talk all across the state of Indiana. So oftentimes the state will see that, hey, this student really belongs here, or this student belongs here, because someone's documentation may not have been up to par. We may not have received it on time. They may not have received it. So our cohort became 256 instead of 251. They added a few kids to us. And our graduation rate was 79.3% because they found a few errors in the documentation that was turned into the state. So we lost about a little bit over 1%. So our actual solidified graduation rate for 2022 state rate was 79.30. Now let's look at our federal rate. Remember, the federal rate does not allow those exclusions. So we still had 203 students that received a diploma. However, our cohort now becomes 294 because remember, those students that are incarcerated, the federal rate doesn't allow us to remove those. Those students who were placed by DCFS, they don't allow us to remove those. Students who are terminally ill, the federal rate does not allow us to remove those. So our cohort number becomes larger at 294. So that gives you a federal rate of 69.05 after the audit. Any questions before I move to the last two columns? Okay, in the last two columns, the 5-year state rate has not been determined yet. It's released at the same time as the 2023 state numbers. That's when that will come out. And then our state non-waiver rate was 79.3% as well. Okay, let's take a peek at the next slide. So I'm happy to announce that you can see that there has been an upward trend, an upward trajectory in our graduation rate at Westside Leadership Academy. In 2019, we awarded 168 diplomas for a 4-year graduation rate of 58.51%. In 2022, we awarded 2020, we awarded 187 diplomas for a graduation rate of 64.71. In 2021, 188 diplomas were awarded, and our graduation rate was 66.67. And most recently, in 2022, we had 203 graduates, and our graduation rate is now 79.30. Any questions? I'll pause for questions. Okay. And I'll read the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, Chriselle, you said this at the beginning, but I just want to emphasize it. Maybe you just said it. The 2023 rate is not yet available.
Correct.
Not because we know the number of graduates, but we don't yet know the cohort. So to calculate the graduation rate, we don't have all of the numbers at this point, but we expect, if I understood, we expect that to be available perhaps by our next meeting.
Yes, possibly. That report is due to the Indiana Department of Education in July. So by then we should have a pre-audited rate. But remember, your post-audited rate won't come until after the actual audit occurs. So we're working on it now.
Do you have, I'm going to ask you a question on the fly here, but do you have the number of students? Can you tell us the number of students who graduated in 2023? Do you have that number handy?
I don't have it handy and available today, but I can definitely bring it to our next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Can you answer about the Plano, the students who had to use Plano to graduate?
It's the credit recovery program.
And how many children graduated in 2022?
Right.
We don't know.
With Plano.
I appreciate that. Perhaps that's something we'll follow up on later and happy to discuss after. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize. I wasn't able to hear, but yes, if you would send that information or I'll get it from Mike or Dr. Razor, and I'd be happy to answer that as well.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Can we take a peek at the next slide, please? I'd like to shift gears really quickly to our Gary Area Career Center that is up and thriving. I just want to go through some data with you for our Career Center. The light blue bar is representing the number of certifications that were earned, and the dark blue bar is representing the students that received dual credit. So in 2019, 2 certifications were earned, 25 students received dual credit, because we truly believe that CTE is college. Back in the day, you had to choose. Do you want to go trade or you want to go college? We don't require students to do that. You can do both. In 2020, 0 students earned certifications and 25 students received dual credit. In 2021, 75 certifications were earned, 60 students received dual credit. 2022, 67 certifications were earned and 95 students received dual credit. And our last school year, 2023, 106 certifications were earned and 78 students received dual credit. So I just wanted to highlight our Gary Area Career Center for doing a tremendous job and getting students interested in the industries.
Could you remind us what the sort of the main certification students can earn are?
I'll bring an extensive listing next time, but I can name some of them. For instance, we have our automotive program. So those students are able to earn an OSHA certification, or they can earn certification for doing brakes, changing oil. Another example would be our cosmetology program. Students are able to earn, of course, their state cosmetology licensure, or they can also earn their barbicide certification. We have student pilots that have earned their student pilot's license. I mean, I could go on and on about certifications. If it's okay with you, I can bring an extensive listing to the next meeting and go through all that we offer.
Thank you.
No problem.
Other questions regarding graduation rate and career center?
I had one.
Yeah, please.
There was a drop in the dual credit. What do you think the reason was for that from the previous year? The previous year was 95. 23, it was down 78.
Sure thing. I'm glad you asked that, because I wanted to make mention of it, but I said, I don't know if I should or not. I don't want to go too long. So I'm happy to talk about that. What happened from 2022 to 2023 is we have partnering universities, and that particular university that teaches dual credit for our program, which was construction, lost their instructor. So we weren't able to offer construction to those students in dual credit. But I am happy to announce that that industry is coming back this upcoming school year. So I'm sure you'll see an increase there.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Other questions? All right.
So the last thing that we wanted to share by way of an academic update is just what the priorities and action items that we're thinking about for the upcoming school year are. This is just one slide. We're still continuing to build it out alongside the principals, the instructional coaches, and ultimately the teachers and community stakeholders. But wanted to, of course, get things in motion and start making plans. So high level, what we're planning actually aligns quite well with a lot of what we heard from some of our community members today. We do want to focus on the science of reading and making sure that every student is receiving research-based reading instruction. We'll focus especially on at the elementary level, but have also started talking about some plans to push into middle school. It's a bit more complicated in middle school. We want to make sure we get it right in the elementaries. But we'll really focus on refining the instruction that exists and make sure that everything that's going in front of students is evidence-based. We've got, you can see some of the actions here. I won't read every bullet point, but we are planning to bring together a group of stakeholders from each building, administrators, coaches, and teachers to make sure that we have buy-in, that, you know, the professional development and training and curriculum that we provide is responsive to the needs of kids. And also to the needs of teachers and their skill level and what training they all need. In the upper grades, where we won't be focusing as explicitly on literacy, we'll really be looking at how can we make sure every student is getting what they need, whether that is some remediation, filling in gaps from previous years. Many students have gaps from COVID in particular, as well as making sure that we're pushing the students who are high ability. So really looking at that data, as was mentioned earlier today, looking at that data, seeing what kids need and designing instruction accordingly. We do it in a cycle. It has to be responsive as kids continue to learn and grow. But we know that that's what kids need. Our next priority is a strategy that researchers will sometimes call teacher clarity. It's really just making sure that we have alignment across the district in what our teachers are teaching on any given day and week. We have 5 elementary schools, and we have a lot of transients between those schools. So we want to make sure that teachers have the tools to collaborate with each other so they can share best practices and make sure that if students are moving between buildings, as we know they do often, that they're able to pick up, you know, in their new classroom without huge disruptions. So that's making sure that we get teacher say in prioritizing based on what students need, make sure that we have tools and high quality instructional materials in every classroom. And then we will continue to implement professional learning communities, which is really the vehicle for how we look at that data with teachers and make instructional decisions that are responsive to that data. So making sure that there's high quality collaboration, that we're looking at good data through formative assessment, which we're already working on, and that teachers are getting that kind of continuous cycle of support and collaboration. Any questions about those 3 priorities for the upcoming year?
Could you just explain to me the science of reading? Is that basically phonics? What is the science of reading?
Oftentimes when people talk about the shift to science of reading, the missing piece was phonics. So there's kind of a push against using direct explicit phonics instruction. So that's part of science of reading is adding that back in. But it's actually, they refer to it as a rope with a number of different factors, phonics, phonological awareness, decoding. I'm not going to be able to name them off the top of my head right now, but yeah. Complex text, making sure that students have access to rich grade level text is part of it as well. So it is kind of the, you know, the reading that we all want kids to be doing, but it's also the adding in the explicit instruction of how do you decode words.
We obviously sit at an inflection point in Gary Community Schools, a good one, that I think we should all be excited about. Obviously, we have about a year left where MGT will be leading the school district during that time. When we think about these programs here, Are these the kinds of things that are easily translated to whatever the next leadership group may want to pick up? And I'm thinking about that new board. I want them to be able to carry it forward.
Yeah, great question. We really specifically wanted to do two things when picking academic priorities, which is one, not go in and change everything all at once, because we do have 1 year and we know there's been churn in the district and that change management can be disruptive. So we wanted it to represent a focusing and a refinement versus a let's come in and change everything. And then we wanted it to be, you'll notice these are not programs, these are not, brand names that we're purchasing right now. These are just best practices and things that we can set up systems and structures that can remain into the next administration. Also really excited to be working alongside Dr. Goods and Ms. Hobson as we implement this academic plan, because we know that they'll be there after we're gone, and excited to leverage their leadership and continue to build their leadership throughout the year so that they can continue to support implementation once MGT is no longer in the management seat.
Thank you. Other questions? We don't take public questions. Thank you.
I got to find out from the parents who's buying when a child needs to be able to, they need to address that. That's what I'm looking for.
Say that again.
The buy-in when a child leaves school in terms of going home, that's really important. This is going to succeed.
I'd like you to connect with Ms. Elton afterwards. You think she's serious about many of these issues you've raised, and academics in particular, that is her focus. So please do connect with her. Any questions from those joining us virtually?
I have a question.
If we could talk afterwards, I don't want to get in the habit of taking questions from the audience. I would ask you, approach me or one of these two at the end of the meeting.
Well,
Thank you.
A question for the new board members who were raised in Gary, Indiana, and taught by the years of the that it's really important for us to know the game.
Yeah, I think we'll, again, if you connect with these two, there'll be opportunities to meet with them. I think they are eager to make those connections, to meet with you and have those conversations. So please, let's connect after the meeting. Not right now. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the update on academics and the deep dive on what is otherwise a very complicated calculation math problem in the graduation. So thank you. All right. Up next, we will pivot to our operations update, and we will turn to Dr. Razor to take us through.
Thank you so much for having me today. Before I jump into what is mainly following up on some questions that we've had in the past that we needed to address, I just wanted to give not an extensive list, but some of the stuff going on this summer, because in a school district, summer is really your chance to get good footing for the next school year. So we have just contracted with a new bus vendor as well as a new custodial vendor, and both of them have the summer to get up under their feet. Bus vendor's working summer school right now, and our new custodial company is working out very well. We're also in the process of installing a new network, which will increase bandwidth and make connectivity much better. And then just things that really improve the school, new carpet in several of our schools, new chillers, improving the intercoms, which is a communications tool as well as a safety and security tool for our schools, and then just making other various safety upgrades. But specifically today, there's been some questions about, I've heard it today and then I've heard it in previous meetings, questions about the swimming pool. And again, being on the job a month and a half, much of this is an archaeological dig for me to find out the information, but I do have information that I want to share. So out of the 1065 money, there was approximately $1.5 million set aside for the pool. In the spring of 2022, about $45,000 was spent to get renovation drawings and specs. When they did those specs, the company got back to us and said, this is a much more extensive process and project than we thought it would be. Just to complete the drawings, we think it's going to be another $200,000. At that point, it appears that the brakes were put on And some research was done into what the actual cost of renovating the pool would be, and it landed around $5 million. Now, that seems pretty reasonable to me because in 2012, I renovated a pool in Jefferson County Public Schools that was in very similar or maybe a little better shape than the West Side pool. And in 2012 dollars, it was $2 million to do that. So what we also need to recognize too, this is not good or bad or me leaning one way or the other, is pools incur quite a bit of annual maintenance costs that is really accelerated beyond normal maintenance. For example, a pool, indoor pool HVAC system, you have about a 10-year lifespan on, where a regular HVAC system just for the building, 20, 25 years. So you have that accelerated replacement plan that you really need to be setting aside money for. So what we're going to do is as you will hear about later, as we work through our budgeting and forecasting models this summer, we're going to have that as a set aside scenario and see what that looks like built into this. But what we can commit to is, even if it's not something we commit to this year, we'll have the information for the new board that then they can decide on that's further down the field than we currently are.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's really important that we pivot Saturday, July 1st, the new advisory board becomes effective. They become the governing body a year from now, if all things remain on track. And it's going to be their responsibility and their obligation. And so I think I'm glad to hear you say that you want to work with them and really bring them into the fold as you're thinking about that decision-making process, and give them ownership of that project.
Then there were also questions about our diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. I discovered that we had 2 modules available that were optional for staff. I've made those mandatory this year as part of staff orientation, where everyone will have to complete DEI training between staff and between staff and students. But more than that, DEI isn't a set aside thing, and equity isn't a set aside thing. It is the thing in education. So we're going to put together a committee of principals and teachers to really talk about professional development and what needs do our teachers have to meet our kids where they are. And whether that be from an academic or an SEL, socio-emotional learning, or just one of the only communities that I've worked with in the last 3.5 years of consulting post-pandemic that shows an increase in student age population. So even with a flat capture rate, that would show enrollment rising over the next 10 years, which again is a positive thing.
So the other folks can't hear us right now, but just so you know, I'm working on.
Why don't we pause for questions regarding the first three items there, swimming pool, diversity, equity, inclusion, and enrollment. Any questions from the board regarding those topics? Can they hear us online yet?
We can.
Any questions from those joining us virtually? All right. Want to continue?
Sure. I think we can transition into the financial update.
Oh,
Mr. McAdam.
great. Let's do that.
Okay, so we are currently seeking a CFO and really want to give that its due diligence, given the importance of that role within Gary Community School Corporation. In the interim, we are working with Cinder Dalton, who has worked with the school corporation in the past. And right now, the next time we meet with you, next meeting, we'll be making a updated amended 5-year forecast to present to DUAB. And that has been our main focus, and is what we're working on right now, is starting to begin a budget, really starting from a zero-based standpoint, which is moving forward where we need to be as a school corporation, and then also preparing for the conclusion of 1065, preparing for the conclusion of ESSER funding. And as hard as you try with ESSER funding to not make them recurring items, some things are things you really want to keep after you've tried them. So that also means there's gonna have to be tough decisions, because if we keep this, it means there's other things that maybe we can't keep. But I want to take this opportunity now to introduce Steve Dalton and let him talk a little bit about his expertise and what they're doing.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Steve Dalton, Senator Dalton. Yes, as it was introduced earlier, we are able to work with the Gary Schools Corporation because we have been working with them for the last 5 or 6 years. And we're happy to step in and assist even more while we are in a search for a professional CFO to guide the school corporation in the future. So we're looking forward to working together with this new team.
Glad to have you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Pete.
All right.
Also have a graph that shows our ESSER spending update that it's a graph that speaks for itself. However, one of the things that you will be considering today are amendments to our ESSER plan. And really what those have to do with are A, shifting priorities, B, funding sources that may be used instead and then able to allocate ESSER for other things. And then just, you know, like I alluded to at first, what the conditions on the ground dictate today that maybe wasn't anticipated in early 2022 when the plan was made.
Great. Thank you. Are there any questions for Dr. Razor regarding finances or on the topics that we discussed? All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, we're going to pivot now. We have 4 contracts that Mr. Miller has reviewed and authorized since our last meeting that fall within his threshold. Mr. Miller, do you want to take us through those?
Yeah, so the 4 copies of those in advance, but just to review them quickly. First contract was for asbestos removal at West Side. Total cost of that contract was $78,650. That was paid for with ESSER 3. There were 8 rooms, most of them are science labs, but obviously it was priority item we wanted to take care of. Next contract was for outdoor fitness equipment. Total cost of $118,000 and $4,700. That was ESSER 2 money spent there. And that equipment was installed is going to be installed at the 2 middle schools. Typically, you're going to put a playground equipment at the elementary school. So this is out of that same line item, but it is more geared for older kids to do some fitness type of things as opposed to what you typically see with the playground, but that's the same line item I take it out. Third one was for STEM certification. This was paid for with Title I dollars, the contract is $105,000. This same vendor has worked through the STEM certification process to help facilitate that with, successfully had done that with some other schools this past year. So there's 3 more schools that we're asking them to take on. So obviously they can't promise STEM certification in the end, but we're purchasing the facilitation services. And then lastly, this is some electrical work, $86,200 paid for out of ESSER 3. Last year, the board had approved the purchase of some external digital marquees. And during that installation process, discovered that only 2 of the buildings had adequate electrical circuits going out to where they were installed. So for 8 of the 10 buildings, there needs to be additional electrical infrastructure put in. Just boring the hole and putting in the pipe in the circuit. So that's what that's for.
Any questions regarding these matters?
Did you want the parents to be able to have resident work on reading?
I'm sorry, we don't take questions from the parents. I do appreciate that. Let's, well, thank you. We'll pivot to consideration of the ESSER plan for Gary Community Schools. And Pete, if you could set the stage for this particular matter, why this is before us today.
So all 209 schools have to have a approval process through the Department of Education. And so Gary has already gone through that step, having all of these items approved through DOE. So given the nature of the stress status, we've also asked them to come before the board for all of those plans. So they've done the same exercise before the board before to say, hey, here's how we're planning to spend this for dollars. I think they discussed ESSER 2 with the board back in December. The last time we talked about ESSER 3 was July of last year. And so Dr. Reed kind of intimated some things cost more than expected, some cost less. And the next agenda item before you is it would spend more than what was originally budgeted for the innovation line item. So before you can address that, we requested that they submit an entire new ESSER 3 plan for you. So you've got 2 documents before you. You've got all the details of, hey, here are the line items, along with a comparison to what that line item was for 2022 from last July. In addition, you've got a summary for you just showing those categorized by new items, increased items, decreased items, and eliminated items. So roughly, you've got about a shift of $4 million from some line items to additional line items. So that might come from Dr. Razor as an additional.
Anything you want to add to that?
And the only thing that I would add is one item of note in there was money set aside for a capital facilities master plan that we have removed because for the last 3.5 years for MGT, I did capital facilities master plans. So we're just going to cover that.
We got a guy.
Yeah, we got a guy.
Very good. Thanks for saying this one. And so just to be clear, on net, it's a shifting of dollars, but the net change is roughly zero.
Right. Yeah, I think it was $1,000 that was not included in everything that they're eligible. But now we're using every last dollar. So
Are there any questions regarding the new plan or the revisions to the plan? As it compares to what we're going to talk about major items. Most of these items we have talked about sort of as we've gone along, including contracts and other obligations. So they're not entirely new. I do want to ask to the point you made earlier, which is around some of those recurring things. Part of the extended day is included here. It's something we've been using ESSER dollars to cover. Obviously, we have to think about how we're going to continue and sustain that effort going forward. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I can. We also use Title I for that, which will be remaining. And many times we use Title I for something as this because there's only so many programs and you can't find more people for them. But another thing that we're doing too is we're running different scenarios. One of the reasons the extended day was implemented not just for learning loss, it was to allow our students to get 440 diplomas in the high school. We've ran some other scenarios that if the day had to reduce slightly or anything that we could do that. But that's going to be something that we talk about very intently as a group moving forward post ESSER. Are we seeing the bang for the buck from the extended day? But it's in my mind, kids in school longer is never a bad thing. So it would be something where we're looking where other areas we can cut potentially to protect the core and the academic core of the district.
Comes down to prioritization of where we want to spend the dollars.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, we do need to take action on this particular item. There's no further discussion. I would entertain a motion to consider the plan.
Make a motion that we accept the plan now.
The motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, call roll.
Mr. McAdam,
Yes.
Mr. Joyce,
Yes.
Ms. Kabaki,
Yes.
Mr. Shackle,
Yes.
Ms. Brown. Didn't hear you, Tracy. Sorry, I can read.
Wait, are you asking me? No,
I'm sorry, Senator Brown, Tracy Brown.
I was gonna say.
Not the first one we got that.
Try again, Tracy.
You want to give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down? All right.
Yes, I said yeah. The suspense was killing. All right, the plan is approved unanimously.
Chairman McDonough, I apologize. I was flustered when my battery died. We never did the 1065 claims docket. It's more bullshit.
Okay, well, why don't we take that now? The 1065 claims docket, that was included in the packet. Dr. Rizzo, is there any comments you want to make about that? Anything you want to point our attention to in this?
No, sir.
You're just approving the main claim, so there's only 6 expenditures there. This is statutory responsibility.
Any questions concerning the claims docket as presented?
No.
Would entertain a motion?
Chairman, I would make a motion to explain that.
All right, motions are a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, would you call the roll?
Mr. McAdam,
Yes.
Mr. Joyce, Ms. Kabaki,
Yes.
Mr. Shackle,
Yes.
Ms. Brown. Still don't see you.
Thumbs up or thumbs down? Okay. Thumbs up, she's in. All right. 1065 claims are approved unanimously. Thank you. All right, the next item of business we have is the consideration of 2 separate but related contracts related to maker spaces. These are for the high school and for the elementary and middle school.
Yeah, I'll invite Dr. Goods to speak to these contracts. She is our resident STEM expert who has been leading the charge on a lot of this work.
Great. Dr. Goods?
Thank you. I'm not sure if you all have been following our STEM efforts, but we've had several events this past school year and the school year before, and we have immersed our students in STEM. STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, and really looking at how those different content areas connect so that they see this from a real world perspective. We've had an amazing student participation in STEM activities and great parental support. So we're excited to continue. Our schools who just achieved STEM certification with the Indiana Department of Education all have makerspaces. Makerspaces open up opportunities for students. They invite in the world of innovation. Along with the actual room being equipped with resources for maker type activities where students can design and engage in the engineering design process, our teachers become trained in the engineering design process. So students have opportunities to create and be innovative and participate in rich academic discourse while collaborating with their peers. These are skills that we all know that we need for the real world. And we want to make sure we are equipping our students to be highly competitive when they leave us. So with that said, I mean, there's the workforce is looking for STEM professionals. There's a need for us to diversify learning experiences for students and to promote critical thinking and problem solving, getting them to think about what they're doing and really have a critical lens on the outcomes that are desired. We want to make sure that we give equal access so that we include our special education students as well as our English language learners. So giving everyone an opportunity to make and do and be successful.
And I'll add that what you have before you today is contract to put a makerspace in at Westside so that students can have K-12 access to STEM opportunity, a full STEM pathway, and then to place it at the remaining elementary schools that don't have them yet.
Any questions regarding this contract or makerspaces in general? Can you, Dr. Goods, could you maybe talk us through what a typical lab STEM lab might look like? If I'm a student walking into that space, what do I find? What am I doing in there?
So you would see, okay, let me see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You might walk in and you would see tables, and it looks like this is an area where I can draw on tables, I can color on tables, I can create on tables. Then you'll see over in the corner maybe a tower of resources for putting little doohickeys together. So maybe not necessarily Legos, and there may be a Lego wall in one of those rooms, but different materials that allow them to connect and create. Then you see maybe a Blowforge. You see a 3D printer. You see different engineering devices that students would be walked through how to use. So you'd have, you'd have lots of filament material for your 3D printers. A lot of times our students have engaged in creating different 3D objects that they want to sell within the buildings, or you'll see cougar heads running around. You'll see lots of different things that they give away that the students have created or the students have made for the school. So it's an opportunity for students to be as creative as possible. It is limitless. Their workbenches, workstations, let's see. It is a room where we are not afraid to get messy, and it won't matter.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Bell.
Yes, sorry that my phone died earlier. Dr. Good, in terms of the maker space, it sounds like an innovative, creative idea. I'm just curious in terms of the grade levels, specific grade levels that's going to have access to it, and when is this occurring? Is this an actual class? Is this a after-school program? Like, how does this fit into the actual curriculum, the Indiana state standards?
Okay, so K to 12 will have access to it. We currently have 2 elementary schools with makerspaces, with complete makerspace areas. A middle school, Bailey STEM Academy, has complete makerspace, about 5 different areas. And now we're adding at the high school, and we want to add at the other elementary schools. So in terms of who will have access, all students K to 12. When will they have access? Within the school day. So teachers are trained and teachers are taking their classes to the makerspace areas. Now we do have specific area resident experts in the building. So at our elementary schools, we have what we call Project Lead the Way teachers. Our computer science teachers are some of our experts. And so throughout the course of a week, students have an elective with computer science and they're able to go into the Makerspace Lab, but they are also able to go into Makerspace Lab with their homeroom teachers. One thing that we're doing is we are looking at departmentalizing at our grade levels, definitely 4 and 5. And so some of those math science teachers are going to be able to integrate their project-based learning and take students right into the Makerspace Labs. So we will be able to get a little deeper in what we do content-wise. It is not after school, it is not extracurricular. This is going to be a part of what they do on a daily basis in our schools. And
Is
as
this
far
kind
as,
of like,
oh, I'm sorry.
is this similar to the new tech model? That's
So the new tech model is more the project-based learning model, but it does integrate project-based learning along with hands-on activities.
Got it. Got it.
And in terms of, I think you asked one more question. It was Indiana state standards. You know, there's a push in the state of Indiana for us to be STEM ready and move in the direction of K-12 STEM career readiness. So these standards are aligned. Those activities that they'll do in those makerspaces are aligned with the Indiana state standards.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We do have a question from Ms. Tracy Brown. She's on speakerphone here because her computer audio isn't working. Ms. Brown, if you want to go ahead and ask.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm interested in the ongoing annual cost to support a makerspace and how those would be sustained once ESSER funding's gone. Can you speak to that?
So the question was, Dr. Good, if you couldn't hear, the ongoing operating costs associated with makerspaces. Have you planned for that? How much will that be? And how will we sustain that once ESSER funding expires?
So in terms of the ongoing costs, most of the costs for makerspace is upfront. They're going to rehab a current classroom in the building, and once that room is created, the major resources are there. After that, we are purchasing materials on an annual basis, which can come out of supply costs. We are also minimally having to professional develop teachers because we do use the trainer model. So once we have 2 or 3 teachers within a building trained, our job will be training other teachers so that everyone is able to use that makerspace room. Another plus that we have is that the First Makerspace Company feels really strongly about the partnership that they have in Gary. And so they come down, their folks will come for any reason. It has not been at a cost to us sometimes. Sometimes they just want to come and try things with us. And so their CEO, Kim, has come plenty of times just to try things with our teachers and our students. And so that is a plus for us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Booth.
If you look in the details of the packet, there is a line for consumables. So the consumables for phase 2 for one building was like $6,300. Phase 3 was $12,000. So relative to the whole cost, it's smaller, but because I would challenge if Mr. Dalton's still listening when we're preparing those forecasts, that'll be incorporated going forward.
And I would say too, as Esther alluded, with the focus on STEM in the state of Indiana within industry, there is a great opportunity for partnering for the consumables annually because it is a cost, but for the entire district, one community partner could potentially cover consumables if we found the right whether it be a steel company or another local industry.
So the first 3 years of consumables are included in this. It's just when we get to year 4, then that'll be able to school.
And I would add that I'm not sure if you're aware, but I would add that we do have a STEM advisory board, and that consists of not only educators, but community partners. And our community partners have been more than willing to jump in and help us with whatever we need or whatever we want. So I will say that we definitely have the support of US Steel and NIPSCO and PepsiCo and a lot of those different partners that sit on that board.
Other questions for Dr. Goods regarding makerspaces or this contract, or other questions about the contract?
I got one more, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Gibbs, since you brought up those corporate partners, I'm gonna throw this out there. I was gonna save it towards the end, but in terms of opportunities to expand workforce development training within the Gary schools, I mean, we don't have to touch that now deeply, but at the end, I'll bring that up to see if you guys can talk about the opportunities and capacity at the Career Center to expand, certain trades and learning. So just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
All right. Would entertain a motion?
I move that we accept the consideration for Gary School Community Contractual Obligations for Westside Lake Academy and also elementary. Listed on the contract. Maneker, McCollum, Williams Elementary School.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, would you call the roll?
Mr. Gaddon,
Yes.
Mr. Joyce,
Yes.
Ms. Kubaki.
Yes.
Mr. Jackal,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Great, unanimous. All right, with that, we're going to pivot to, as you recall, we took on an additional duty related to the excessive transfer fund list that used to reside with the affiliated board of this board. Mr. Miller, do you want to introduce this topic?
We talked about this last time, just as a reminder, this is nothing we have to vote on. This is a DOE responsibility, but DUAB has an advising consent vote. So we can still discuss it. If you want to give feedback back to DOE that we think there's a different recommendation before, we can do that, but no need to vote on this. So there were a total of 9 schools that were over 15% in transfer funds from the education to the operations fund for the last calendar year. We have received all 9 of those responses. 4 of those we dealt with last meeting, 4 of those we're going to discuss right now. And there's 1 school that came in 2 days ago, so we'll deal with that one next couple. For the ones that are here today, just a quick review of the responses from the school corporations. Alexandria, they were 18.74%, and that was attributable to a duplicate transfer. They just simply did something twice when they only intended to do it once back in November. They do have some new internal controls put in place, so that hopefully will not be an issue for going forward. And DOE's recommendation is that no further action be taken. Next one is Anderson Schools. They were 18.07%. They had some CFO turnover last year, and in that period, there was some funds that were supposed to come from a debt fund, but for whatever reason, it was mistakenly taken from education instead. So they do have adequate revenue to pay for those obligations. It just simply was everyone's taken from the wrong fund, and they're aware of that mistake and rectified it. And DOE's recommendations of no further action be taken. Concord was 15.01%, $4,134. Normally we see the 14.99%, but Concord came in just a percent high. Not that we take that for granted and no one is giving back, but they are aware. And to the credit, they're not just gonna go right into right next time. They have identified some cost reduction plans so that they will not be over that next year. DOE's recommendations, no further action taken. And then last is Wabash City Schools. Wabash was at 16.44% last year. That was not an error. They just simply had a deficit in their operations fund. And so the additional transfer was necessary to cover that shortfall. They have outlined a series of cost saving measures for the 23-24 school year, which seems to be adequate to cover that going forward. DOE's recommendations of no further action taken.
Any questions regarding any of those matters? All right, seeing none. That concludes our scheduled business for the business from board members to come before the board today.
Can I speak to the front of the board for a few minutes?
Before you accept public comment, we don't do that. Thank you. Is there any, does anyone else, Senator Melton, I believe you indicated you might have another topic.
Yeah, just a couple of closing thoughts and some suggestions. I want to go back to some of the public comments. I'm trying to find my notes here that was discussed earlier. I think, number one, I want to just thank the community for coming, traveling down. I know I'm not able to be there in person, but I just want to commend everybody for their commitment to the Gary schools and continually voicing their thoughts and suggestions and opinions for DUAB. So to my colleagues on the board, I'm hoping everyone recognizes and realize that not having a local board at this point in time, the commitment that the community is making by getting up and making that 2.5-hour drive, I just want to thank them for that. Next thing I want to just mention, a couple of things that came up in discussion. I know we talked about this during the legislative session, but I do think it's worth having an external audit MGT leads. And it's for all parties. I think for the state MGT as well as the local community to have a closeout report, a final report that's unbiased, that doesn't reflect one way or the other if the internal organization or the state has done it, but just a separate entity. I think that will help everyone as we transition and move forward. So I wanted to make that recommendation. The next thing as well, I know Attorney Coleman mentioned this, but while there are dollars and opportunities for demolition, and I didn't get a chance to hear the balance of 1065 and all of that, but what are the chances of looking at doing more in terms of demolishing some of the structures in the community before 1065 is completed, or we run the life course of that? Lastly, I'll just say this. Over the last several years, I know some of the questions and comments that come before the board and body, the community will make. And sometimes there's a response from DUAB or MGT, and sometimes there's not a direct response, either in writing or in person. I think it would be worth having some type of working sessions so folks can have those issues addressed in a meaningful way, so it won't feel like it's not being addressed at all. So there's a way, and I know, Pete, you've been doing a great job of trying to be as attentive as possible. You're in Gary often, but I think it's worth having more dialogue with all of the parties that are constantly traveling to Indianapolis and figure out what are those issues, what are those questions, and how can those be addressed in a manner that everybody feels respected in a way. So I know I closed once, I'm gonna close again. And I'm gonna say this, with the hopes of being in a new role next year for myself, and I wanted to say this publicly in front of everyone, it is my goal that the city of Gary plays a more direct and active role in overall education for all children in the city. And leaning on the state, leaning on the Department of Education in terms of how do we best make that happen in terms of local municipality, partnering with our nonprofits, partnering with our churches, partnering with the schools to ensure that we help support and get what the children need, especially from an early child education, workforce development perspective. And as I wrap up my tenure at NIPSCO, we have been in discussions on how can we be more involved in workforce training, be it if it's engineers, line workers, poll workers. So when I bring up the questions about the Career Center, I would love to get a new tour of Career Center. I haven't done a tour of it. I don't know what actually is being taught, and seeing if there's ways to bring more collaborations into that facility, into other locations with our corporate partners. I know in conversations with Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio carpenters, I urged them to reach out to the district. I believe they've done so, and I think that they were willing to land an instructor from the carpenters world. I'm not sure if that has happened just yet, but I just want to just say I want to be able to be of as much help and of a resource to the district now and into the future. So I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, for the few minutes.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Appreciate your comments. Mr. Joyce, I believe you had some comments you wanted to make regarding the audit.
I do. I want to make a comment, and Senator Melvin, with all due respect to your question about a financial statement audit, to everybody in the audience who questioned the audit, the question whether a financial statement audit needs to be done or has been done, or whether money's been questionably spent accurate or inaccurately, I can guarantee you that there's been an audit performed, it's a financial statement audit that's been performed in accordance with every standard out there that's been done. It's been performed now through 6/30 of 2022 because 2023 hasn't been done yet. When 2023 is done, we'll do that audit and we'll look at those funds. If you have questionable costs that you know somebody used money for personal gain, bring me those claims and I will look at them specifically. If they used them for personal gain, I will hold them accountable. I will prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. But just because you don't like how somebody spent money doesn't make it a questionable cost. They choose how they spend money because they're the ones in charge of that money at this point in time. The money is being spent in accordance with the grants. Right now, it is. It may not be spent how you would spend it in accordance with that grant, but it is being spent in accordance with that grant. I can't tell you anything different than that. There's nobody going to look at it and say anything different on that. You may not like the outcome of how the ESSER money was spent, but it was still spent for ESSER available monies. You may not like how the Title I money was spent, but it was still spent for Title I available events. That's not a question in that aspect of it, or it would be identified as a finding within the audit. I don't work for Gary Community Schools. My agency doesn't work for DUAB or the state. It works for the people of the state of Indiana. They're independent of that body. We answer to the legislature. We don't answer to anybody else. Those audits are accurate. But if you do have anything that is identifiable as somebody using money for personal gain, bring it to me. I will look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce.
Thank you.
Other comments or topics? Okay. Thank you for the robust discussion today. I do appreciate everyone being here and making the trip. The engagement is appreciated and welcome. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. With that, we are adjourned.